So for my historic moment, I'm going to talk about the impact that the Zodiac Killer had on American history. So, the Zodiac Killer had 5 confirmed kills and he operated in Northern California. This is a map of the different places where he had this confirmed kills. It happened in the late 1960s, and its importance was that it was the most famous unsolved case in American history. It became a fixture of the pop culture because of the people's fear of the thing itself, but because of the fame when people in the newspaper would have to publish his cryptograms that he would make because he would threaten to kill other people if it wasn't printed on the front page. So these cryptograms, there were 4 printed, and 2 of them were solved, but 1 was not solved until 2020. So, like I said, he had 5 confirmed murders and 2 were injured yet survived. He claimed to kill 37 people. He had been linked to these, but could never be proved. In Southern California and in other places. He had uncertain motive, so they were not sure why he was doing it, but he often tried to kill young couples while they were placed by themselves, or well, it was just the 2 of them. This is a sketch from one of the survived victims that was able to be produced, but again, this is the closest we have to figuring out who this guy is because they never confirmed who he was. So, of his 5, these are the first 2 that were confirmed. This is Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday. This is also referred to as the Lake Herman murders. So, David was 17 years old, and this murder took place on December 20th in 1968 in Benica, California. Betty Lou was only 16 at the time of this. They were on their first date, and they pulled into a place referred to as Lover's Lane, which you can see here. This is the Lover's Lane here. It's kind of just a gravel path off the road where they could pull in and have some alone time. But their bodies were later found at 11 p.m. by a neighbor. They had no leads whatsoever as to what happened to them. But 8 years later, after the murder took place, it was determined that another car had pulled in next to them, most likely had ordered them out of the car, but David never even made it out of the car before he was shot point blank. And then Betty Lou tried to escape, but only made it about 28 feet before she was shot 5 times in it. 7 months after this, the Blue Rock Springs murders took place. This included Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mayhew. This was on July 4th of 1969, when Darlene was only 22 and David was 19. This is actually only 4 miles away from the first murder that took place. So, it's said that they were parked. This is actually a picture of Blue Rock Springs Park. So they must have parked, and somebody had come and parked next to them and then left. But then they came back and parked behind them. It's said that the killer then came to the window with a flashlight and a 9mm gun and pointed it into their faces. 5 shots came through that window, and a few went through David into Darlene, or Michael into Darlene, He came back and shot them twice more after even knowing that that he thought he was dead. He then, on July 5th, the day after this murder, called the police department to claim this, as well as the last murder from Lake Herman Road. He called from a phone booth at a gas station, which is where the call was tracked back to. But unfortunately, Farron was dead on arrival, so she did not survive the shots that went through her into Michael. But Michael actually survived this, even though he got shot in the face, neck, and chest. He was actually the first one who was able to describe the Zodiac Killer as his attacker, and was likely what led to the majority of the features in the sketch. So, in August 1st of 1969, 3 letters were sent to 3 newspapers, with each of them claiming the murders, but also with 1/3 of a cryptogram. This is an example of what he sent, and this symbol at the bottom, we will likely refer to later, is a very big, it's almost his signature. He threatened to kill all weekend until he got to 12 people if this was not published on the front page of all 3 of them. But these cryptograms were supposed to be concealing his identity, so if somebody were to essentially decode all of them, they would have been able to figure out who he was. So he first coined his name in actually one of these and included the details of the murder because people didn't believe that the person who was sending these in was actually the murderer. The day after that, the first cryptogram was cracked. It had some kind of misspelled message on it claiming that the reason why he was killing these people was because he was claiming slaves for the afterlife. But he wouldn't give his name because it would slow down his collection of these slaves. Then, the Lake Berryessa murders took place on September 27th in 1969. Brian Hartnell, who was only 20, and Cecilia Shepard, who was 22, they were picnicking at Lake Berryessa. Then, this man, this is a depiction, this is not an actual picture from the event, approached them with this executioner's hood and then sunglasses, dark sunglasses, to cover up his eyes with this symbol, like we just talked about. This is his signature thing. He then, he actually approached them at first with a gun, though, claimed to have escaped from jail in either Colorado or Montana. This is what he told the couple. He stole this vehicle after he had escaped from jail, but claimed that it was too hot to continue driving because he was trying to get to Mexico. So he demanded that he could take their car and take their money with him so he could continue this journey. He then made Cecilia tie up Brian before he himself tied up Cecilia. However, when the Zodiac killer saw how loosely that Cecilia had tied up Brian, he became very angry and began to stab them. Brian endured 6 stab wounds, and Cecilia endured 10 because of his anger after this. The killer then hiked 500 yards up this mountain/hill to write this symbol on Cecilia's car. He also wrote, it says Vallejo, 12/20/68, which would refer to his first murder, 7/4/69, which would refer to the second, and then today, the September 27th murder. So he said September 27th, 1969, and that it happened at 6:30 by knife. He wrote this all in her car. So Shepard told police what had happened because she was still conscious when they showed up, but by the time that she got to the hospital, she became into a coma and never woke up. But Hartnell actually survived the 6 shot wounds. So on our last list of confirmed murders by the Zodiac killer, in Presidio Heights on October 11th, 1969, Paul Stein, who was a cab driver, was just doing his job. He drove out, he had a man get into his cab, he drove out 1 block past the destination, and I'm assuming that this caused more anger within the Zodiac killer, and he reached over and shot him in the head. He took his wallet and his keys, and he actually also tore off a part of his shirt, which was bloodied. But 3 teenagers witnessed this and still could not provide an accurate description of who it was. They were on the phone with the police at the time that this happened. He actually, the Zodiac killer, got out, wiped out the car, and then proceeded to walk away. They could have been caught, but the dispatchers who were on the phone with the 3 boys told the police officers that the man was black. So they weren't able to find him. October 13th, a letter was then sent to the news with claim of this murder from the Zodiac killer with the piece of his shirt that he took. Again, because they were questioning, is this guy who's sending these letters the actual murderer? The day after that, he threatened to kill kids on a school bus and described how he would do it if they didn't print what he was trying to say to them. Then, another person had been asked to be on a talk show and called in, said that he wouldn't reveal himself because he was scared of the gas chamber, which is California's then punishment for crimes such as these. But it was determined that this was not the Zodiac killer, this was actually just a patient in a mental hospital. However, November 8th, another cryptogram was mailed to the police department, and this was the one that wasn't solved until 2020. This claimed that he was not the guy who called on the talk show, and he isn't afraid to die, actually, because then he already has his slaves that he wanted for the afterlife, so he claims. The day after that, he sent a 7-page letter talking to the police about how he walked this way, such as shown in this picture. He actually ran into a police officer right about here and had a 3-minute conversation with him just moments after he had killed him. But they, again, were looking for a black man, so I had no idea who that was. So, in conclusion of these 5 murders, the police investigated probably 2,500 suspects, somewhere around there, but they could never prove anything was tied to actual anyone. Many deaths are still possible and linked to the Zodiac killer, but have never been confirmed. 2 cryptograms are still yet to be solved. And the impact on history was the fear then, but now the obsession that so many true crime junkies have with trying to solve these cryptograms and figure out who he was, even though he is likely passed away by now.
Good job.